Yes, good morning. I'd like to help with the information deficit that the Oireachtas suffers from. And a reference to it was made there to a letter I wrote to the TDs in October of 2023. And since then, Michael Fitzmaurice has asked me to comment on how we're getting on with the forbearance directive and improvements in that regard. And so I've come before you again today with another letter. I've written a letter to Michael, and I'm now putting it into the public domain. And it indicates the continuing problems that I perceive in this area. It's a bit difficult for me as a public servant to be corresponding with one TD or one senator, so I have to do this in a broad way, put matters into the public domain so nobody can complain afterwards that that I was in any way favouring one side or another in the debate. So I brought together a number of documents which are available, and I might go through some of them later on if I get a chance. But the first thing I wanted to say was to back up the comment made there towards the end of his contribution, was that I do have the reply from the central bank to a letter to the questions which I posed for the Finance Committee. I suggested to the Finance Committee when I met them at a long session in December last that they put 20 questions to the Governor of the Central Bank. On the next occasion they might meet him. And these were questions in relation to how they were going to handle the new directive. And for example, I'll just pick one as an example. If the originator retains risk, or has derivative or loop-back proprietary trading settlement exposure, will the tax avoidance it has booked be factored in calculating the consumer's net position? Now, let's see. Straight away, this is very technical stuff, but this is the sort of stuff that actually the EU is talking about. You think there's a lot of gobbledygook in EU material, but it's the small print of the EU that gives you the clue that the EU are in fact trying to ensure that the consumer in Europe is given the fresh start opportunities that have traditionally been available in Europe even since the Second World War. So the reply from the central bank was, please be assured the central bank is fully cognizant of its mandate to ensure compliance with the above new regulations. See? And such as the CMA. So in other words, they said they'll deal with each case, each scenario. We must have regard to the facts of each scenario when exercising its supervisory functions. Well, you might think that's a hopeless answer. It is, of course, a hopeless answer. But it is this. It does say that the central bank is going to have regard to the particular facts of each scenario when exercising its supervisory functions. It's going to exercise supervisory functions. That is a concession, which we haven't really recognised from the central bank before. In fact, there we have last week, we have their consumer support honcho has now been moved from that position and is no longer offering, the bank is no longer offering the same level of consumer support, consumer protection. And that's something that would concern me. Now, I have come before you today, I wanted to make 3 points, 3 very important points, and then having said that, I'm going to read my press statement, if I can find it. Is it there? No, it's in here, yeah. 3 points I wanted to make today. One is, you'll try and remember these now, because that's all you remember today. 1, the Apple money. There should be an investment bank purchased or set up. It's a mistake to say, oh, we've got a load of money, let's lodge it in the bank deposit account and use it bit by bit. That is not how modern finance works. Modern finance works with what they call liquid collateral. It says, here is a bunch of money. This is collateral. We now leverage this collateral. We now make more of the collateral. If you put the money into a bank, the bank is going to leverage it. It's going to lend out the equivalent or more of that in further lending, and it's going to draw in further capital investment into the bank and bump up its balance sheet accordingly. It is an extraordinary matter. I came across this in a book about the 1920s, and struck me as something that you might be interested in. We have the the new chairman of the Reichsbank, 1923. In 1924, he meets the chairman of the Bank of England. And they're in a bad way in Germany. They need money. And what does he say? He says, Schacht proposed that the Bank of England lend a certain amount of capital to a new subsidiary of the Reichsbank to build up its sterling reserves and funds. He was asking for a mere $25 million, which, supplemented by a further 25 million that he hoped to raise from capital held abroad by German banks, would be enough to give the new subsidiary access to the London market and provide the nucleus for as much as 200 million in loans. That is how banking works. You have capital, you put it's the equity in the bank, and you then use that as your collateral to generate a mushrooming effect in credit availability. So instead of 13 or 14 billion pounds, we could be looking at 50 billion pounds worth, or euros, worth of capital. And of course that money should be then earmarked for investment in infrastructure. It should be an investment bank, it should be infrastructural, it should create long-term infrastructure. I'm talking about water, roads, sewers, even solar heating materials. All of these are very long-term investments, and they're precisely what an investment bank should be doing. Instead of that, we're going to give it to the pillar banks and say, will you look after this for us now, while we work out what to do with it? So, unfortunately, I'm going to read my press release now. The Apple tax windfall should be spent in setting up a bank and investment credit corporation, a bit like the ACC or the ICC in the old days, wholly owned by the state. The Housing Commission recommended that approved housing bodies, that's AHBs, should be enabled to finance housing with off-balance sheet finance. Bet you didn't know that. Recommendation 59. See, I read them. That seed has just germinated. A new investment bank with Apple tax windfall as its capital base could finance public and private infrastructure with available credit of many times the bank's own capital by employing the banking industry's tried and tested off-balance sheet access to liquidity. But no one who is advising the government will recommend this option. Not when a new bank would impact on their bottom line or the bottom line of their other clients. The government is getting its advice from conflicted actors. Now, crucial infrastructure bottlenecks now have security dimensions. The EU is now live to sovereignty risks attaching to some foreign direct investors, and in the 2019 Screening of Foreign Direct Investment into the Union, Regulation number 452, don't know whether you've ever heard of that. It's called on member states to interpose a new administrative licensing structure on FDI, coupled with an obligation to self-report FDI activity to Brussels. This regulation prompted our Screening of Third Country Transactions Act 2023. So compare the description. Screening of foreign direct investment into the Union. That's what Brussels said. But somebody in here decided that that was a little bit close to the bone. They'd have to water that down so that nobody would actually spot it. So they now call the act the Screening of Third Country Transactions Act. And it was introduced into the law on the 2nd of August 2023, I think. The 2nd of August, when everybody has packed their bags and going on holidays. They say, we're not interested in third country transactions, are we? That really has nothing to do with us. And of course it passes then. The significant misdescription in the title may have been an intentional smokescreen. That's my comment. Now, I push this a little further. Key to grasping the implications of the new law is that whenever a security issue, it's in inverted commas, because security means something else in Brussels. It means they're concerned about the sovereignty of Europe as a whole, Chinese, all that stuff. So whenever a security issue needs to be assessed, any related domestic tax avoidance structure must be a factor, engaging the threat posed to Europe. To this extent, member states' tax sovereignty is now back on the EU's agenda. Now, that's news. Now, if you take a look at the Act which transposes the EU regulation. It sets up a mechanism, an administrative mechanism, where somebody wanting to bring in FDI has to notify, and the minister has a little team together, and they look at it, and they say, that's fine, that'll go ahead, that's grand. Or not, as the case may be, is at the administrative level. Hang on a second. Isn't that what happened with Apple? That is precisely what happened with Apple. People are not aware of what happened in the Apple case in 1990. Apple came to the revenue commissioners. The revenue commissioners said, we have a function to carry out here under Section 25 of the Act. So what do we have to do? We have to figure out, on a kind of a back-of-the-envelope basis, how much profit will be taxable in Ireland, how much tax you'll pay in Ireland. Apple said, oh, well, we've got 1,000 employees in Cork. So the revenue commissioner said, ah, right, you've got a good point there. And so what would you sort of think of paying in terms of tax? And Apple said, well, we think 40% of the actual costs, the working costs there. Oh, yeah, that seems okay. So the deal was done, an advanced deal was done. We'll accept your accounts, and we'll accept the proportion of the working costs aspect of it as the basis on which the 40% is to be assessed. Now that was an administrative function, and it seems to me nobody read the Commission's report on Apple, and I've included a number of pages in this which very clearly set out how the Commission was not saying that there was anything wrong with Ireland's tax laws. No, they weren't saying anything wrong with tax laws. They said what happened in the back room was what happened, and that was wrong because a figure was offered and accepted without any analysis. Now, you might say, gosh, did somebody slip up there? Did somebody not understand state aid rules? Or was there something else behind it? I'm not saying there was any corruption here. What I am saying is that we were certainly impressed with Apple as an employer potential. And we were certainly prepared to do a deal on a figure that they found acceptable. Because what's the counterfactual here? Supposing, as a revenue commissioners, we had said, oh gosh, no. What about your IP there? You can't be taking all that profit out of the manufacturing there and saying it belongs to the IP people. And how many people are you employed in San Bernardino, whatever it is, Cupertino? Oh no, that won't work at all. No, we have to play this by the rules here. The counterfactual is, Apple would have said, okay, that's all right, we're off to Portugal. So there's an amazing double think here about what happened in Apple. The EU Commission was on an agenda to try and sort out the state aid problem. Yes, it was a backdoor method for tackling the question of tax sovereignty. There's an article here which I have included, it's 2007, which sets out precisely how many offences Ireland had committed in relation to state aid in taxation of multinationals. And that was the backdrop which was ignored handily, if I can put it that way, in the back room in the Revenue Commissioners. Why hasn't there been an outpouring of demand for an inquiry as to how we made a mistake in the Apple case? Is anybody going to look after that? Well, it's going to be an inquiry apparently about the bicycle shed. Now, our recent experience with FDI in the shape of investor funds acquiring bank loan portfolios, because that's FDI as well, has broader effects which are concerning. It is impossible not to characterise their dismantling of our statutory land title registration system, statutory land title registration system as other than a security concern. Where to next, I say? Distributed ledger technology. That's where we're going with securitization, with bank credit. The asset, the security itself, will disappear into a ledger. And can you imagine the circuit court down in Dundalk or I don't know, down in Limerick or whatever, trying to figure out where in the ledger they're going to locate the man's farm? This is completely 21st century stuff. And we need to get a grasp of this. I'll just give you an example. I mean, if you want to change mortgages now very quickly, it's a very easy job. You just fill in a form and you ring your previous mortgage and you go to a new bank. And you think that would be extremely complicated. All the legal documents have to change over and all that. Well, it doesn't happen that way. It's all done like in a digital manner, and the titles are transferred and all of it, and the documents are huge. Really very few people understand what's going on, and the Circuit Court and the High Court even are having difficulty in getting the lenders to actually come to court with the correct documents. They usually come in with one document and are missing another, then they go into the other document in another case and missing the first document. And so the thing, and of course if you're a lay litigant, you're trying to defend this, you don't even know what documents are missing. So you're relying on a judge to say, I think I've heard something about this before, I think we need to look more closely at this. And there are judgments which say that, but does the lay litigant know that? No. Does the barrister for the bank say, oh judge, you have to be careful to check out such and such? No. So it goes through on a digitized basis. I'll give you an example which is significant, and that is the fact that the receivers and their principals, the Vulture funds, are now becoming so concerned about what's going on in the courts and the kind of rumblings that are going on, that they've now taken to selling the property without a court order or without a title. So you want to bid for this at the auction? Fine, but these are the special conditions that attach to it. One, but we are making no representations that we own this property. We are not saying that there's anybody in it. Do not come to us looking for more documents because we don't have any. This is, as I said in the press release, I said, receivers are now selling off repossessed homes and farms without provable title or court order. They are bypassing the effort needed to document their title. It's too risky. They are selling the keys and little else. It shortchanges the debtor, and it's a criminal offence. Did you know it's a criminal offence? No. It's a criminal offence because when we were in the good old days, when we were changing land law in 2009 and consolidating it, we introduced the 2009 Act, which was, if you like, to be the Bible. And it says, oh, I probably can't find, there it is there, Section 60 of the 2009 Act. This is in the old, 2009 Act, refers back to the 19th century's principles there. It says the Land Purchase Act, 1859 and 1869. Right? So these are and they were being reintroduced in 2009. Now, the Oireachtas really wasn't up to date at that point. It wasn't really skilled in dealing with this, probably because this particular land reform measure had been in the pipeline for about 12 years. But they hadn't certainly cottoned on to the banking fraternity and their activities. So they included this. It says, any person disposing of a land to a purchaser, or the solicitor or other agent of such a person who, with intent to defraud, conceals from the purchaser any instrument or encumbrance material to the title, or falsifies any information or matter on which the title may depend, in order to induce the purchaser to accept the title offered or produced, is guilty of an offence under this Act. Sorry, that's what the law says. I haven't seen it referred to in any case.
Section
60.
60, yeah.
Now, that was the second point I wanted to make, and the final point I wanted to make was, with tax haven, yeah, I said in relation to money laundering, and I said money laundering is suspected in some cases. This is as a result of this, buy the keys off me and we're not sure where the farmer has gone. But that's when money laundering is suspected. In fact, there's a suggestion that some of the pillar banks are funding the purchases by the people who buy the keys, and the people who buy the keys are then refinancing through some foreign sources. Horse racing, that kind of stuff, That's where the money is coming from. With tax haven tax neutrality, these people, the Vulture funds, they have supernormal profits. With tax haven tax neutrality, that's a kind of euphemism saying we don't pay tax. So we are a tax haven here in Ireland, and so they pay no tax on it. They have supernormal profits. They're not worried about title. They're dismantling our land registry system. They're causing tax avoidance and causing money laundering, and they're walking away with it. These Section 110 tax breaks and the QIAIF breaks that are mentioned by Theo here are next in line for state aid investigation by the Commission. They are selective and distort the housing market. And in the bundle of documents which I've made available here, I've enclosed a letter which I wrote to Commissioner Vestager, setting out the case. This was the middle of last year, the middle of 2022, setting out the case for further investigation into the state aid which is available indirectly through the Vulture funds. Anybody who's buying portfolio from the banks. And that seems to me to be, following the Apple decision, that seems to me where we're going to go with this. And the Vulture funds needs to address themselves to the concerns that the Commission has in relation to state aid. I remember when I mentioned this in Brussels at the Parliament, I think it was Brussels or Strasbourg, I don't remember. I mentioned it, I had a meeting with Luke Ming-Flanagan, and the matter got a certain amount of publicity here. And Leo Varadkar, who was the Taoiseach at the time, he was asked what was the story about the state aid and the Vulture funds, state aid in relation to housing. And he said, state aid? I can't see the connection at all. Well, it seems to me to be very obvious. On two fronts, we've got the state aid causing distortion in the marketplace. And now we've also got state aid or aids to FDI investments, special treatment for FDI investments. They might not be state aid, they might not be in the taxation end of it, but if they're causing a strategic security problem for the EU, you can bet your bottom dollar that other member states are going to be piling in on top of us and saying, here's an FDA guy you got in, and you didn't look at this aspect, or you didn't look at that aspect, something about the chips, or something about the financing, the financing from China, or something about the real ownership of the investment. You didn't look at these either. Now's your time to say, are you actually performing the roles you're just supposed to be performing under the security regulation? Europe is changing, and the Vulture funds are going to have it difficult to survive in the current environment.